Our next presenter is Dr. Pam Bishop. She's here. Welcome. Dr. Pam Bishop was a research professor and director of National Institute for STEM Evaluation and Research. And today she is a patient advocate for long COVID, fighting for treatments. Thank you for being here. We look forward to your insights. The stage is yours, Pam.
Well, thank you for having me again. I really appreciate being given this opportunity. When I said yes to telling my story in January, I had no idea of the scale of the conference at this point. But I always say yes to any opportunity to raise awareness. So I just said yes, and here I am. I'm very humbled to be sharing the stage with all of these leaders in the chronic illness community. I'm not one of them. I'm just a regular person who had a regular life that's been derailed by long COVID. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge all of the people who have been living with ME/CFS for decades before long COVID caused this mass disabling event, because we've learned so much from those who've come before us. And I'm honored to tell my story as a person with long COVID and subsequent ME/CFS. Although I'm just one patient, I do think that some of the things we experience are universal. So here's my story. So I think when we talk about chronic illness, it's important to talk about who we were before we got sick, because this reference point is important for others to see this stark contrast in our lives now. Yes.
I apologize, it's Marco. So we can see your meeting notes at the bottom. Yeah, perfectly.
Okay. Have I fixed it?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I knew I was going to do that. All right, so there we go. So who I was before. My husband and I met about 25 years ago. And from early on, we were lovers of the outdoors. We loved to hike. This picture is from our first year of dating. It's in the top of Gregory Bald in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is about an hour from where we live. About 20-ish years later, we're still growing strong with our love of all things outdoors. And we've passed that love on to our children. We were a very active family. We took biking trips. Our favorite vacation was family camp, which is like summer camp for kids, but also has activities for adults. And we did rafting and all those sorts of things. We also had a very vibrant social life. We loved outdoor music and going to plays. And I also had a very tight-knit group of friends, and we would go out together and take trips together, and yeah, just a very active life. Our kids played a lot of sports, and our weekends and evenings were filled up with that, so didn't sit still much. This one's hard for me to talk about, so please bear with me. I did have a career pre-COVID. I do have a PhD, which seems pretty useless these days. I was the director of my own research center and the associate director of another very large research center at a large university. I wore a lot of hats and stayed very busy. I was working about 50 plus hours a week, collaborating with researchers all around the world. I traveled all around the world solo to collaborate with researchers in other countries. I was a grant writer, personnel manager, budget manager. I basically ran the whole institute myself. We had about $10 million worth of grants at the time of my illness. And a massive amount of my identity was tied to my successful career. So I worked from home in December or in all of 2020 after COVID hit, and we were very COVID cautious. The kids stayed home and did virtual schooling. And then December 7th, 2020, COVID found us anyway. And my first symptoms were loss of taste and smell. And so I knew right away that I very likely had COVID, and I panicked. People were still dying in droves from the virus, and I was terrified. But my acute infection was unlike anything I'd heard about in the news at the time. I didn't have the common cough and fever that everyone talked about back then. My oxygen never dropped. So technically, I was a mild case, but it was anything but mild. I kept a journal of my symptoms and I put them into a word cloud generator. And you can see here that pain was a very predominant feature. I had 3 weeks of intense pain, neurological and psychiatric issues, among other things. What I remember most was a horrible, horrible headache like I'd never had before, that I couldn't get relief from, very bizarre calf pain, and dissociation syndrome where I just felt like I wasn't living in reality. And every day I thought I was going to die. I remember telling my husband, this is in my brain. I can feel it. My brain feels inflamed. I can't explain it. And I remember, bargaining with God to not let me die because I didn't want to leave my children without a mother. But I didn't die, obviously. I got better. And this happens with quite a lot of people in the long COVID community. Some people get the initial acute infection and stay sick. Some people have the acute infection and then appear to get better and then slowly regress over time. And that was the case with me. So I went back to virtual work in January of 2021, but I was having still episodes of nausea, headache, brain fog, fatigue, a lot of pain. So because I was working from home, I could mask that, and I would take a call and I would lie down, and then I would get up and I would work on a project, and I would lie down, and it just repeated, and my days were dragging out to these 12 and 14-hour days because I couldn't stay upright long enough and focus long enough to work. At the time, I thought that was the healing process. I'd been through a lot. I'd never been sick like that before. But by March of 2021, the episodes were every day, all the time, and the symptoms had grown exponentially. And I remember reading in the news about something called long COVID around that time. And I distinctly remember sitting down to dinner with my husband and saying, I don't think this is the healing process. I think I have something called long COVID. And I really didn't know much about it at that point. I was fortunate enough that I had bought into something called a sick leave bank at the university. And people kept donating their time to me because I worked across many departments at the university and everyone knew my situation. So I was able to stay on paid sick leave until January of 2022. I was very fortunate. But by December of 2021, I knew that I was not getting better. And I decided to put in for early retirement and officially ended my career as a professor. So this is a non-exhaustive list of my post-COVID symptoms now. Some of the symptoms are fairly constant. Fatigue, post-exertional malaise, post-exertional symptom exacerbation, and pain are pretty much constant. The only one of these that I had before COVID were migraines, and they were completely under control with medication. Now they're out of control once again. So I'm not going to go over all of these individually. I think none of this is new. Probably every patient on this call has at least one of these and probably more. So as you can imagine, I was pretty terrified and confused. We didn't know much about long COVID back then, even less than now. And I'd been completely healthy and active before my COVID infection. And by March 2021, I was almost completely incapacitated by my symptoms. So I began what I call my post-COVID medical odyssey. The first doctor I saw said I was anxious. I think that was very common, maybe still is, for especially women coming in with these symptoms. He offered me an antidepressant and no further follow-up, even though I had, at the time, what I know now are classic POTS symptoms. I ended up speaking with a friend. I was still working, and she said she knew someone on social media who had been writing about this. And so that was sort of my first networking activity among patients with long COVID. I reached out to her. She told me about a primary care physician in town who didn't know much about long COVID but believed her. And little did I know at that time that simply being believed would be such a huge obstacle in getting appropriate health care. So around the time that I saw the primary care physician, I found out about a long COVID clinic that was opening about 3 hours from where I lived. I was in one of the first cohorts of patients to go there. At the time, there were two sentiments in the medical community about long COVID. One was that we would get better with time. So I would see a doctor and they'd say, oh, give it 6 months. And then at 6 months, they would say, give it 9 months. And then at 9 months, they'd say, oh, give it a year. And then after that, they would typically give up. And the other sentiment was that they could find the problem with existing tests and fix us. And of course, we now know that neither of those scenarios is true for most people with long COVID. The long COVID clinic did rule out most organ damage. I would find out later that I have significant damage to my brain. But beyond that, all of the referrals kept feeling like an effort in futility. I saw countless specialists for my myriad symptoms, including a number of neurologists, some of whom didn't know the first thing about COVID, which was very frustrating for me because I had been keeping up with the research and I felt like I was coming in definitely more informed than most of the doctors that I was seeing at the long COVID clinic. So after my last neurology visit at the long COVID clinic in January of this year, we were trying to explore my rapidly declining cognitive issues, and we had done some testing, and she sort of threw her hands up and said, well, you've got functional neurological disorder. And I don't think she knew that I knew what that was. And I had said, I know that's not what it is. We've explored that. I have a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and that was one of the first things I asked about because that is actually treatable. And so we had a bit of a contentious conversation about that. And she told me I needed to find a new neurologist. So at that point, I sought out the Mayo Clinic. And there I was able to speak to a doctor who was trained in ME/CFS and POTS and other comorbidities associated with long COVID. So I was able to get testing that I'd not been able to get up to that point, which is what some of these pictures are. The one where I look like I'm covered in paint was called the sweat test, where they basically cover you in dust and put you in a human oven. I wouldn't recommend it, but it helps to detect small fiber neuropathy. So now I have a plan moving forward to try various pharmaceuticals to treat my specific symptoms. And that's currently where I am in my medical odyssey. I'm trying out some of the things that the Mayo Clinic suggested. So what have I gotten from this medical odyssey so far? Well, I've gotten a lot of diagnoses. Most of these I suspected on my own from reading the research and matching up my symptoms, and then bringing them to the various doctors that I've seen. And at this point, I've seen over 60 doctors. And then asking for diagnostic tests. Other symptoms like the significant depression that I developed about 7 months into the illness sprang up in a way that were way too obvious to ignore. And so I was diagnosed that way. And then some came from participating in research studies like the Yale Listen study, led by Dr. Akiko Iwasaki, which showed reactivated Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, and enterovirus. But I guess most importantly, and I guess validating, even though it's terrifying, I've learned since that awful December in 2020 that I actually do have brain damage from COVID-19. I now have cerebral small vessel disease, gliosis, endothelial dysfunction, and reduced vasomotor reactivity and cerebrovascular reserves, all of which contribute to cognitive dysfunction, among other things. So not functional neurological diagnosis. And it is terrifying to know all of these things are going on with my body now. But I would rather be informed than uninformed. And I will continue to push until all of my symptoms are explained. And you can see on the bottom right-hand corner, when I was at the Mayo Clinic, they said that it was possible that I also have Sjogren's, craniocervical instability, and tethered cord syndrome, but we didn't have time to test for all of those. And actually, CCI and tethered cord syndrome require very specialized testing, and that's not available at the Mayo Clinic. So what does it look like to live with all of these diagnoses? Well, I spend most of my time horizontally. These photos are me attending my kids' sporting events. In the summer, my heat intolerance forces me to lie in the car with air conditioning on or bring fans. I have all sorts of accoutrements now to keep myself cool in the heat. I live in East Tennessee in the United States, and it gets very hot and humid here in the summer. So I have a very, very hard time even being outside at all here in the summer. At home, I spend most of my days in bed, usually with an eye mask, usually in the dark and quiet. If I'm lucky, I can listen to an audiobook to pass the time. If I've been upright too long, the pain in my neck gets so intense that I have to wear a brace and a heating pad just to be able to stand it. I get migraines several days a week now, and I know those of you who get migraines that are on the call or looking at this picture saying yes, yes, because that's what it's like. Those days are possibly the worst, with the exception of my MCAS flare days, and that's mast cell activation syndrome. My whole face swells up, I get anxious, itchy, and it feels like my whole autonomic system is revolting against me on those days. So, what's it like to live with long COVID and ME/CFS? I think most of us would agree that grief and loss loom very large in our lives. Many of us have lost our careers, which leads to financial loss and a complete upheaval of our plans for the future. It's hard to have a social life because that means making plans, and we never know how we're going to feel hour to hour, much less on a future day. Possibly the biggest source of grief for me is the loss of who I was before. The, hiking, biking, camping, on the go, self-assured professor, mother, wife, and friend doesn't exist anymore. And I think that we all struggle with that loss of self. I need to go back. I think it's important to note that the grief process is not linear for us, as we maybe were taught in other periods of life. The relapsing and remitting nature of long COVID, along with the development of new symptoms and loss of abilities over time, means that the stages of grief are all over the place. I personally strive for acceptance because that is my coping mechanism, but acceptance looks different on any given day. Some of you know I actually wrote an essay about acceptance that was on today.com. When I was at a point in life where I felt very at peace with where my health was, but my health has deteriorated since then. And so, instead of being at acceptance, I may be somewhere in this pile of spaghetti over here on the right around anger and bargaining again. So always trying to get back to acceptance. Another constant struggle is medical gaslighting. I know that all of the patients on this call know what that's like. Very few patients, especially women, weren't told at some point that they're just anxious. It's all in their head. Some doctors don't believe in long COVID. Others don't want to bother with our complexities and label us with functional neurological disorder. We could have a whole talk on that subject, but that's all I'll say now due to time. And then when you get to a doctor who will help, they have to get you on the medication roller coaster, the onboarding and side effects of some of the medications I've taken, put me in a worse place than before I took them. Sometimes they calm down with time and other times they don't. So in addition to dealing with the illness, dealing with the side effects of medications and the ups and downs of that and trying to keep your head on straight. And finally, we live with constant uncertainty. No one can tell us what happens next. Many of us, like me, are declining with time, but how much time do we have? No one can tell us that. Almost every day I experience symptoms that pre-COVID would have sent me to the emergency room, but now I just wait and see what will happen because I know that the emergency room will do nothing but make me feel worse. And that works now until it doesn't, I guess. So my final thoughts are to a couple of different audiences, to the medical professionals who might be listening. Believe your patients. The vast majority of us do not pretend to be sick. We pretend to be well. If you don't know what's happening, please say you don't know. Don't blame the patient. Don't say that it's psychosomatic. Don't say it's in our head. Just say you don't know. Government agencies, we need funding. We need pharmaceutical treatment trials. Long COVID and ME/CFS are not individual problems. They're a societal problem. It's costing the economy billions of dollars. Investing in us is investing in the future. And to all the researchers out there, especially the ones in this conference, thank you. Please don't give up on us. Our lives depend on it. And finally, to my fellow sufferers, I would say, I know you're afraid. I feel it too. We have no idea if there's an end in sight, but we do have each other. My suggestion is find a community of other people with long COVID, whether that's on social media, through an advocacy group, or through a long COVID clinic, which is where I found my support group that I've been part of since early 2021. And finally, don't be afraid to seek a good therapist. Mental health is health, and this is so hard. We can't control what's happening to us. We can only control, at least for the most part, on any given day, how we react to it. So take good care, my friends. And now I will take questions, if there are any. And if we don't get to the questions, this is my Twitter handle if you don't follow me, and I'm happy to answer there.
Thank you so much, Pam, for telling your story and also for the courage of being so open and vulnerable about it. Many of the questions are actually not questions, but are comments of appreciation and respect, and many people writing how very much they can relate to what you are talking about, to what you have been going through.
Great.
But there are a few questions, and let's get to them. The first question, I don't know if you have an answer to that. How come that so many people had a very active life before catching long COVID and ME/CFS? Is there any link?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from my experience and the, large numbers of people that I've met with long COVID over the years. And it does seem that people who are very type A, like myself, who were very active, tend to get long COVID. And I think that it possibly, again, I'm not a medical doctor, I don't know, but could be because we're the type who pushed through. I should not have gone back to work in January and tried to live a regular life again, but I did, and I pushed myself really hard. And I wonder all the time if that would have made a difference if I would have rested more.
Thank you. Next question concerns the academia. Is it possible to work in academia with long COVID? Do you know affected colleagues to manage to keep their jobs in the academia? Of course, that's a question for many.
Yeah, there are certainly people who are living with long COVID and still working in academia. I think it depends on the degree to which you're disabled. I am quite disabled these days. I'm not upright very often. I have trouble thinking and putting together. I mean, that PowerPoint was the first one I'd done in 3.5 years, and you would not believe how long it took to try to get that together. But yeah, I do know that there are people who have long COVID that are still working in academia. But again, I think it depends on your degree of disability. You know, people with long COVID work in a lot of careers. But if you, especially, I think, have at least moderate ME/CFS, I think that really makes it difficult.
Thank you. Next question is about identity, large question. How do you cope with the loss of identity that comes with the loss of one's pre-illness career?
Therapy. And I laugh, but that's actually a very serious response. When I realized about 6 months after I had my initial infection that I was very likely going to lose my career. And that was a huge, huge, huge identity of my life. I knew that I was going to have a mental, I'm sorry, words are hard to come by. I knew that I was going to have a crisis. So I sought a therapist, and I got lucky on the first try. A lot of people don't. I found a therapist who works with people and now specializes in chronic illness. And she has saved my life, absolutely, on certain occasions. But she also helps give me perspective. And I think if you'll remember the grief graphic that I put up, you know, it's not linear in this case. I think with chronic illness, especially relapsing and remitting illness, that can be getting worse with time. And so I'm constantly coming to her and saying, I'm struggling with this again. And, you know, help me gain perspective. What, you know, how can I get through this? So yeah, I would strongly, strongly recommend, if it is available to you, to find a good therapist who can help you gain perspective on what is happening.
Thank you. That also relates to a presentation from yesterday by Bettina Grande, who was talking on identity
Yes.
from a psychological perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Then a question about kind of the knowledge gap between patients and healthcare workers. How can we get society and the general medical profession to be more open-minded about illness and to listen to patients and to work with us, not against us?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I mean, you know, this conference is a good start. And I know that Petrino Lab is coming up with, you know, an educational series for practitioners. But, you know, how I've handled it so far is, one, I tell my story. I'm very public about everything that I've gone through, especially on Twitter is sort of my platform for that. I bring research. So I'm an avid reader. Well, I was a much more avid reader of the research when my brain worked a little better in the early years, but now I still try to keep up, and I bring that information to my doctors, and many, many, many of them will not be receptive to that. But if you find one that is receptive to that, that's gold. I have my primary care physician as that person for me, and I bring all that information to her, and she reads it, and we discuss it at you know, future appointments, and that's been my way of helping her to understand, you know, what this is all about, and you know, how we can try to tackle it moving forward.
Thank you very much again. Time is over. I'll just read one last comment. My story too is what somebody is writing. My heart is with you. So few get what we're dealing with day by day. And I think your presentation is an important step into getting people to understand. Thank you very much. And we are all taking a break now, which is, I guess, good for all of us.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.